Hello, folks. Yeah, I'm Will. I'm going to be talking about my attempts to value defensive shape using R360 data. So, quick intro to the problem. The question I'm trying to answer is how much better or worse than average was a team's defensive shape in a given situation in the match? So, the idea is defensive positioning changes what the attacking team chooses to do on the ball. So if passing lane is blocked, they'll choose different pass potentially. The basic principles the defending team are trying to adhere to are they want to limit the availability of dangerous options to the opposition. They want to increase their chances of getting the ball back, and then they want to increase their chances of scoring when they win the ball back. There are various bits of tactical terminology associated with how teams might go about this. So pressing traps, low blocks, things like that. So one way to approach the problem would be try and figure out when those things are happening on the pitch and use that as a starting point of analysis. The way I'm going to try and do it is build models that quantify those sort of basic principles and then analyse stuff from there. So because I'm talking about defending, I have to mention a couple of things. One is that defending is understudied, and the other one is that Paolo Maldini once said if he had to make a tackle, he'd already made a mistake. So, quick outline of the talk. I'll talk about valuing stuff in general, just to set the scene a bit. Then I'll talk about valuing stuff that's more than just on-ball actions, which is what most stuff seems to focus on so far. Talk about the outline of the particular model I've built, show some results and applications, and then talk about some stuff that went wrong and stuff I learned along the way. So some terminology to start out with. We seem to have sort of settled on Markov decision processes as the way we think about valuing stuff in football generally. So you have some notion of the state of the game, which might include sort of you have some notion of the state of the game, which is sort of where the players are positioned on pitch, where the ball is, perhaps some context about what's happened in the possession so far. Then you have agents who perform actions which modify the state of the game. And each state has some value associated with it, which is the expected future reward from that state. Future reward might be, goals for or against, something like that. So another thing that drops out of Markov decision processes is this quantity called advantage. This is basically something you see a lot in football. It's how we tend to value on-ball actions a lot. So a particular action happens, you get an expected future reward given that the specific action has occurred, and then you compare that to the expected future reward averaged over the things that would typically have happened from that state, and that gives you some indication of like how valuable that was relative to stuff that usually happens from there. So if we sort of take the approach that we normally take with value models, where we go, this state has this value, the next state has this value, and then you take the difference between those. When you bring positional data in like this, you end up folding in the value of where the attacking team has moved to the valuation of the next state, and the same for the defending team. So the attacking team might have moved into much more advantageous positions between events, and that increases the value of the subsequent state. But it's not really due to what the player on the ball's done, it's due to the movement of the attacking team players. So we want to try and build some way to like disentangle the impact of, like in this case, those three distinct actions on like how the value of the state changes. So yeah, you could do this for sort of all three of those like actions. I'm going to focus on the defending team here. The idea basically is going back to this sort of notion of advantage. So you want the value associated with something that's happened in a specific case. So the defending team, which is red here, has moved to a particular location. And then we want to compare that to sort of the average over the typical things that the defending team would have done from that state. So that's on the right there. So we train two models and then compare the outputs, both of which have very similar inputs and predict the same thing. So the difference between these is going to give us a notion of like how good the transition of the defending team was to where they ended up. It's kind of, the model's based on a fairly basic set of event features. some information about the previous two events. The only event types I've included are what we call in our OBV model true possession states. So they're things that indicate that the team is in control of the ball, basically. The target is the expected goal difference resulting from the next shot. So if you're in possession of the ball and the other team has the next shot, you end up with a negative reward for that particular episode, which is period between shots or the end of a half if a shot doesn't occur before that happens. The way I'm representing 360 frames for this model is a little bit crude. Like there are other ways you can approach this, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But yeah, basically I center the coordinates so that the ball is right in the middle. And then for each team, I'll build a surface that looks like this, which is put a Gaussian on each player, build this little heat map, and then flatten that out, run it through PCA, get like a compressed representation of that frame, and then plug that back into the model with all the other event level features. And then, so in one case, I'll exclude this heat map for the defending team. This is sort of like a very quick justification of using next shot XG rather than next goal scored. So I think like the next goal wins game is kind of like the intuitive way you'd like to represent this model. But if you use next shot XG, you get something that's very strongly correlated with it and you get a bit more signal because shots are much more common than goals. So if you fit these two models, this is just a bit of evaluation. So each dot here is a team over a season. It's split out by competition. These are sort of correlations with a few different quantities. So this is, if you sum up the value of all events for a team over the season and compare that to their goal difference, it's like the correlation is very strong. The correlation with expected goals is much stronger. Expected goal difference is much stronger because like it's designed to be. But like the values that come out correspond to goal difference, basically. The thing with this is like, because of the way values are calculated by taking the difference between states, you end up with lots of cancellation in the middle. So this is really only looking at like how the model is valuing shots, like for the most part. So like the internal XG model of the value model overall is all right, but we're sort of losing whether it's capturing lots of other stuff by doing that aggregation. So at the bottom here, this looks at like only actions by the attacking team and only actions that they face. So this is looking at how the model's valuing turnovers a bit more. And in this case, the calibration goes a little bit off. It's not too far away. But yeah, I think it is like indicative that the model's kind of in the right area, but it's perhaps not perfect. And there's potentially not enough event context to properly capture like how turnovers impact things. That's the same evaluation for the model with the actual defending locations excluded. It's like very similar. They both perform similarly. So this is calibration at the event level of both models. So in this sort of bulk area where most of the observations are, which you can see from the histogram, like the model's really well calibrated. And then it goes off a little bit at the extremes. But for the most part, like the value assigned to an event is well calibrated to whether the team actually goes on to score or concede later on. These are the model residuals split over the pitch. So like the magnitude here is not huge. Again, it's a little bit larger than you'd expect, really. Like the model is not perfectly capturing downstream scoring and conceding probabilities, but it's not miles away. There's a little bit of spatial correlation as well, which is not ideal, but like overall it doesn't look horrible. And then if you plot, like if you just average the values that come out of the model over the pitch, you end up with this very familiar looking surface in both cases where the value rockets as you get closer to goal. So if you use these two models, go through the process I described earlier on, and use this to find the average value of a defensive shape for a team in the Premier League last season, this is what comes out. So I think you get teams that you would typically think of as being good defensively near the top of the list, teams you would think of as being less good near the bottom of the list. The particular ordering of this is maybe up for debate a little bit, but I think like it shows that the model's capturing something. about good defending. So I've run this on 10 competitions from last season, I think. If you look at the correlation between this average shape value and goals conceded, it's about 0.31, which is a bit lower than you'd expect. Maybe it's definitely capturing something about defending. And that also doesn't include where that team is giving the ball away and how often and possession and stuff, because it's an average over events. So I think an indication that the model's picking some stuff up. Maybe the signal to noise ratio is not as good as we'd hope. But you can also do that aggregation over the pitch. So this is teams in the Premier League last season where the model thinks their defensive shape was good on the pitch, where it thinks it was bad. So blue in this case is good defensive shape. So a few things pop out to me. So Man City, sort of high up the pitch, have a really, really good defensive shape value, which is something you associate with them. Near their own goal, it's not necessarily that great, but it doesn't matter so much because it's hard to get to that point of goal because they're good higher up the pitch. Man United, sort of near the halfway line out wide, which watching them is an area that stands out to me as somewhere they kind of try and target defensively, so they've got space to attack when they win the ball back. And then Spurs under Conte, sort of near their own goal, were quite good last season. So I think it's picking up some stuff about how teams play and what they're good at. So I tried to push the model a little bit more and look at individual events. So this is sorting a match's events by defensive shape value and looking at the best and the worst. So again, it seems to be picking up some kind of basic principles. So this was the worst defensive shape value, and it's a shot right near the goal, and there are no defenders in the way of it. So the model thinks that's not very good. The other case is kind of a shot from a very similar location, but there are sort of 3 blockers in the way of it. So the model thinks the defending team is doing a good job of defending it relative to what you'd expect a team to do. This is something Tom, our CTO, calls the value of meh, which is kind of stuff with these kinds of models, stuff close to goal, always matters loads more, and you lose the ability to really properly understand what's happening in the middle of the pitch as much as you'd like to. So kind of going into this, I was sort of hoping you'd find situations in the middle of the pitch where the defensive shape breaks down, and then you leave a massive gap, and it's almost inevitable that they'll go on to score because you've made a mistake earlier on in the possession. But that doesn't really come out. There's still loads of noise associated with going on to convert that opportunity and stuff. So it all sort of just squashes towards the goal, and you don't necessarily pick out the most interesting bits of analysis by doing it like this, I think. So yeah, the final thing I tried to do was get this model to optimize the positioning of the defending team according to its internal value models. And again, some of the results, you kind of have to look at a lot of these to figure out what the model's doing. I've treated it more as a sort of explanation thing rather than a concrete application at this point, I think, because this takes a while to run. The optimization's not very stable. So I think in principle you could use this to assign value to the defensive movement of individual players, but at this point I don't think it would scale well enough to be able to do that kind of thing. If you look at enough of these, you start to see general things that the model thinks are good defending. So it will try and move players to block passing lanes, as you can see down the bottom there, and it's moved that red player near the ball to kind of block inside options a bit more and stuff. And this is the kind of general stuff that tends to happen when you run this optimizer, but the results are kind of subject to change quite a bit, and it's not stable enough to really use as you'd want to, I don't think, at this point. So a little bit more about how that works. But it's constrained optimization. Each player can move up to 5 yards, and then you tell the optimizer to go and find the best defensive shape value according to the model. And then there was sort of a notion of importance of of movement of each player to the overall improvement in defensive shape, which ignores dependencies between players. It might be that the model thinks if this player moves here and this player moves here, then the defensive shape's better. But if one does it individually, and the other one stays where they are, maybe that like even makes the defensive shape worse. So it's not picking that up, but it's, you know, it gives you some way of like seeing which players the model cares about most for the change in defensive shape value. So yeah, I didn't mention like the way I've represented 360 frames in this model is a bit crude. I think like some neural network-based thing is probably a more elegant way to represent those features, but I found that, like, as is typical of neural networks, they're much more difficult to train. I think with these value applications particularly, you need a really small learning rate because the target is so noisy, so you can get sort of massive updates based on like the noise in the target, and that means like the thing can just oscillate loads between and not properly converge. So you need to set a small learning rate. That means it takes ages to train. That means it's slow to iterate on the model and like try and improve it and stuff. So yeah, I think potentially more flexible, but more difficult to get to the point where it works as well as you want to. So yeah, overall my takeaways from working on this are that this is a hard problem. I think it's an interesting problem to work on. I think there are some signs that it's a tractable problem. All the things you can do to improve models generally apply here. So better representations, more data, better model architectures. Overall, like most of the components of this seem quite volatile, like small changes to hyperparameters, the data I was putting in, things like that, like can have reasonably large impacts on sort of the rankings that come out and stuff. So I think it's difficult to trust a model like this at this point properly, but like I think there are signs that this is picking some stuff up, and if you aggregate it enough, like I think it picks up useful things about what teams are doing and what they're good at. So thanks, that's me. Any questions I'll take?
Hi, very nice presentation. I think you're unduly skeptical of your own model. What do you think about approaching the problem through reinforcement learning, and in contrast to what most people have done, as far as I understand, consider the agent not just a ball-carrying player, but all defenders or potentially all?
Right. So yeah, lots of the language we use to describe the value model we fit is the same language as in reinforcement learning, right? And it does seem that this kind of stuff should fit naturally into that framework. Yes. I've not seen much of it try. I feel like even trying to value what the whole team is doing, like, seems difficult to me.
Yes, yeah.
So like, I think if with the amount of data we have, trying to do that for individual players is probably a step too far. But like, it's certainly an appealing idea and something I've thought about.
I think also the fact that you have not immediate reward of your actions. And also, multiple actions together can lead to delayed reward. And because as you say, you have limited data, you probably need some sort of like proxy reward function as opposed to, not conceding a goal.
Yes, yeah. Which is also difficult because then you kind of have to make it arbitrary in a way, like that the thing you introduce as like a sub-goal is not something you actually care about necessarily, and you have to decide what that is. It can't be like you get 50% closer to scoring a goal, which is the actual value you want to associate with the state. Because if you knew that, you wouldn't have to do it in the first place. So it would have to be like, I've got into the final third, and then like the units of that are not the same as goals, and it's like, I don't know. I'm not sure how you'd approach defining those sub-goals, basically. Well, I'm sure it would help, but I can't think of how you would define them.
Cool, thank you.
Were you able to find out factors for bad defensive shapes, so you could tell at some point, against this team, this is what we need to do to get them to a bad defensive shape?
I didn't look at that. So yeah, I think so. I mentioned at the start, like you could try and classify, like map stuff to tactical terminology, and then go from there. And I think that probably does lead you to better insights about like what's actually going on. I think like in this, I suppose you could try and apply like the optimization thing, and like basically what I did is just look at loads of them and see like, are there principles that the model wants you to adhere to, which is not a particularly rigorous way of doing it. And you probably do want to sort of like cluster states as much as you can and say, if you do things that look like this, you get a better defensive shape value. I didn't take that route.